Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Sean Courtney, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Officer at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Our webinar today, Client Information Systems, Getting the Best Out of New Technology, will be presented by Mandy Doon, Director of CommunityServices.net, also known as CSNet. If you have a question during the webinar, please type in the question box and we'll aim to save some time at the end to go through them. And just also to let you know, a recording of today's presentation and a copy of the slides will be sent to you all in the days following, so you can revisit it at any time. That's all from me, so I'd now like to hand over to Mandy. Thank you, Mandy.
Thank you very much, Sean, and hello everybody in Australia and New Zealand. It's great to have your time and to spend some time thinking about something which is a really important issue for all of you, I'm sure, in terms of thinking about client information systems and what some of the new features are that new technology offer us. Just a little brief introduction. So I'm Mandy Doon, I'm Director of CommunityServices.net. Tim Glee joining us through the webinar as well. In terms of background on CSNet, we are a company that was formed out of a partnership between Community Link Australia, which was a consulting company working with human services organisations, which was formed in 1996. And through our work through management services, governance work that we were doing with organisations, we kept coming up against this issue time and time again, which was about collecting data and organisations needing to be able to collect data and actually demonstrate what they were achieving. So in 2007 we formed a partnership with an IT company called iWeb Solutions here in Brisbane, and since then we've built CSNet 4 times. So I think in terms of today's presentation, I'm very happy to talk to you about any of those new kinds of technology that we've now incorporated into the system, but I think we've definitely seen in the last 10 years how much technology has changed, and I think it's the challenge for us is to continue to improve and to continue trying to incorporate some of those new tools in the context of human services. So thank you for being with us, and we'll work our way through our agenda today. The first thing we kind of thought we would just touch on is, what's the difference between a client information system and how is it different to a CRM? We're going to want to talk about some of the benefits of web-based client information systems, because this is really the direction of new technology. We're going to talk about streamlining data collection and workflows and some examples of how we've done that. And just to give you some ideas and food for thought about how you can ask questions about some of the new features that are coming through. Measuring client and social outcomes is something that we are now constantly asked by customers, because it's something that not only funders in terms of government but also philanthropists are asking, and it opens up the potential for human services organisations to actually seek funding outside of those normal government channels. We're going to have a little chat about the future of payment by outcomes, and as we go through we'll probably just throw in a few case studies in terms of how we've seen the system used by our customers and the potential that it offers. I'm conscious that we've got a really broad range of people who've registered for the webinar, so naturally I don't think we can cover every aspect, I suppose, in terms of particular sectors, but what we've tried to do is to capture enough information for you to see that what might be relevant for your particular sector, and I'm really happy at the end to get some questions about how it might be applied in your particular sector. So what is a client information system and how is it different to a CRM? This language, is generally used for CRM, being a software system for managing the interactions with current and potential customers. So in this interaction, the customer of the CRM is the human services organisation in our particular context. In human services, of course, we know that the ultimate customer is the client who's receiving the service. So really, I suppose if we were to kind of try and put it in a really simple way, for us, the difference is that a client information management system shifts the focus to supporting the client and the work of the service, so that we're focusing and about the benefits. What's the benefit of the service that's intended, and how does that then link to achieve the outcomes that the client wants to achieve in the long term? So the shift in focus, I think, is one of the key things in terms of the difference between client information management system and a CRM. But the language is tricky, and there's lots of other different terms for software systems that support human services in their work. Some people use case management, performance management, records management, practice evaluation tools, client feedback portals, outcome and impact measurement tools. And in general, we don't all agree on what these labels mean. So some of the features across those different software solutions are common and others are different. I think what we wanted to do today was not try and spend too much time delving into the language of the different terms, but to be able to show you some of the features which might be in a range of those software solutions, where the use of new technology and the use of the internet are benefits for organisations that are in the space of delivering human services, regardless of what they're called. We know that there are lots of reports that are coming through showing us that, you know, not-for-profit, the sector and the space is very competitive, that not-for-profits need to work hard to be sustainable and thrive. So there's this focus on this word innovation, and while it's probably overused in many contexts, I think for us the innovation part of it is the flexibility and agility. So we want to run through some of the features of a web-based system that can provide some leverage for you in terms of innovation. I'm going to focus particularly on the web-based client information systems and the benefits of them. And so in terms of efficiency gains here, we've said, well, you can access your data 24/7. That's an efficiency gain in terms of being able to access data whenever. You can also communicate important information in real time. The reduction of administrative duplication, that's stuff that people talk about in terms of red tape, the breaking down of role silos in organisations so that workers become multi-skilled and more productive across a range of different roles is really important and can be supported by web-based client information systems. Software as a service is, CSNet is an example of software as a service, which is about getting you going in a short time frame. So it's a system which allows some flexibility within the architecture of the software itself, but you don't need to build from ground up. You don't need those huge upfront costs. So getting started is a much faster and more cost-effective way of doing it. Capacity in web-based systems is elastic. So you can add new workers, reduce workers, you can add programs and change as your needs change. And so it means that it gives you the flexibility, and then the costs are also reflected in that. Certainly in terms of CSNet, you will pay a license fee per user. So if your users go down, then you don't pay for the licenses that are not being used. The new solutions for cost-effective integration from client information systems to other systems is also another potential efficiency gain. So the new web-based systems have got what's called an application programming interface, an API, which means that one system can talk to another system. So the old days of having to build these huge things that tried to go across every type of function, you don't need to build that kind of system anymore. And provided you have another system that's got an API front end, then these systems can talk to one another. You can map the data items that need to go, for instance, from your client information system into the finance system if you want to run your invoicing out of finance, if you needed to go into HR or payroll. In terms of effectiveness gains, evidence-based decision-making in real time is a real effectiveness gain. You can collect the data once and use it for reporting against multiple outcome frameworks, and we'll talk some more about outcome frameworks as we go through today's presentation. You can deliver services and take a iPad or a tablet with you And so you can support that in any location where you've got connection to the internet. Your workers can use any kind of device, and the way that the new technologies are being built with this new thing called a responsive user interface means that it will resize depending on what type of device you're looking at, which means that it's a much better user experience in terms of what it looks like and being able to visualize the information on the screen. The data entry screens link strongly to outcomes. So this is an example, I suppose, where in CSNet what we've tried to do is to build the screens so that if I'm doing a particular piece of work, even if it's a small task in that person's case plan or in a community development activity, that I can still link very strongly what I do and how it contributes to a particular outcome. And that helps to build worker connections and motivation to improve data quality. In terms of ongoing internal organisational capacity, what we're trying to do when we work with people is to not only build technical skill but also build human services practice development. So I think it's that, I will come back to this point as we go through, which is it's the combination of those two skill sets which really does give much stronger effectiveness in the organisation in terms of these software systems. We know that effectiveness is not just about numbers and being able to look at the numbers, but it's the stories that people tell. And so, you know, a web-based system where you can link the stories to the numbers to demonstrate effectiveness is a really powerful tool to be able to use it in that way. In CSNet and in other web-based systems now, you can integrate client assessment, client feedback tools into the system so that they become part of business as usual. So as an example, in CSNet, you can do pre and post surveys. So for instance, when somebody comes into the service, or if you're doing a community development activity, if you wanted to test awareness in the community about a particular aspect, you could do some surveys up front and then run that survey again after you've finished your activity or after you've been working on a case plan with an individual. And what it would do is help you to show change over time. By setting up the survey and assessment tools in CSNet or another web-based system, it means that you can actually send that survey or to the client or to a member of the community. They can fill that out. As soon as they've finished completing it, they click it, save it, and it comes straight back into CSNet and sits there in the system. So the benefit of linking up those assessment tools with the client record or the community record that you've got in terms of the other data that you collect certainly helps to support effectiveness in the organisation. I think that, you know, in terms of the future, we all know that the real-time data collection but multiple data sources and being able to manage that is about supporting learning in the organisation and being able to look for those patterns over time. If you're taking data, I suppose collecting data at periodic times, it's helpful and it will give you a snapshot of what that means. But by linking those kind of feedback surveys and assessment tools with the work that you're doing from ground up, it actually will tell you not only what you're doing, the numbers, but also how are things being done and then what do I need to do to improve. Some of the aspects, I suppose, in terms of CSNet where we've integrated some features as a web-based system is to make it an end-to-end solution so that you know that when you run a report around measurement outcomes, around client outcomes, measuring outcomes and client outcomes, that you will be able to go all the way back to the ground-up data collection to create that line of sight. And this, of course, gives people confidence that the data that's being collected is coming from ground up, that it can be validated, and gives more confidence in the reports that you're generating out of the system. That's a really important thing, I think, to ask. If you're looking at other systems, kind of understanding along the spectrum, is this a case management system, some people call it that, which is about individual clients down in the kind of the workflow end of it, or is it an outcome measurement system that does periodic data collection and measures outcomes? Do these things talk together? Is it all in the one system? So CSNet is an example of that end-to-end solution, from individual, group or community development activities from ground up to measurement of client and community outcomes. One of the other things to ask, I suppose, about web-based systems is the capacity to automatically upload to government systems. And I apologise that I don't know what's happening in New Zealand in terms of automatic government uploads. Certainly in Australia here, we've got, for anyone who's receiving Commonwealth funding, the capacity to push data straight out of CSNet into DSS Data Exchange is something which is really helpful for organisations and workers to not be having to generate reports themselves, that the system itself will push up the data every evening. The capacity to talk between one system and another, and I touched on that earlier about an API interface, so that you could have your client information system which is talking to finance. If you need to run an invoice, for instance, if you're heading into funding under the NDIS, that you can use the client information system to demonstrate that those things have been done and the service is delivered. And if you want to run the invoicing component of it out of the finance system, that you can push the data across to the finance system according to what's needed to generate an invoice. Same with HR and payroll. So I'll show you a bit of the some screens in terms of how CSNet, I suppose, will allocate workers. You can find workers, you can create appointments. It's not meant to be a time-sheeting system, but it can certainly talk to an HR or payroll system and push the data that's required across using the API. We've touched on it being completely mobile in terms of whatever kind of tablet, PC or laptop you want to use, provided you've got the internet connection. One of the other things, I suppose, that we get feedback from our customers is the capacity for the reporting end to be driving the system. I think people are really frustrated by systems where they put data in but they never see anything come out of it, and it's really about trying to create that connection and make it useful for people so that they see the benefit for their daily work in terms of what can I see, how's it going to help me in my daily work, not just what do I put in and somebody else like a government department gets out of it. I just thought I'd show you a couple of examples. This is a CSNet screenshot of the dashboard. So this is something that we're currently working on with customers and asking them for their feedback on, you know, what's going to be useful. The dashboard is, I think, a really helpful way of seeing in a snapshot the kinds of things that you might need for your daily work. It will also give you a level kind of organisational view of what's being done. So in this particular screenshot, you can see it's got some kind of placeholders at the top. This one talks about it's got current numbers of active clients, current numbers of active cases, open sessions. You know, it's something that if a manager needs to know that people are not closing sessions in order to maintain the integrity of the data, that needs to be closed within a short space of time, so that they will be able to click on the see more thing, which I can't click on here unfortunately. Shows you a more detail about what programs we're talking about here in terms of having open sessions, and it can support that manager to have those discussions with workers. So these kind of things are placeholders in this particular example of a dashboard. Underneath there's a couple of graphs, and they're kind of simple ones in terms of time and new cases. Here we've got an example of a graph of numbers of users, male and female. These things can be developed according to how it makes sense for the organisation, but this kind of just gives you an example, I suppose, of how dashboards can be used. Excuse me. This is an example of aggregated reports. So in CSNet, it has a whole bunch of aggregated reports that you can run at any time, as well as reports at individual client level, group level, or if you're doing community development and education activity, you can run it at that level as well. In CSNet, there's over 200 what we call standard reports, and you can choose whichever ones you want from that. If people want other specific reports, then they can ask for those reports to be written and configured for them. And we have a person whose full-time job it is to write reports. They usually don't take very long, but it just means that organisations don't have to have that skill set in the organisation itself, and we can support that part of it. You'll see that the reports are not only in terms of activities, and the way we use the word activities is about individual activities and cases, group work activities, and community development education activities, and these would be run according to what makes sense for your particular sector and service type. These are the aggregated reports at client and participant level. Down here you can see family reports. And I think this is one of the strengths of the web-based systems, is that you can not only get a perspective at an individual level, but by pulling the data together, you can also see what's happening at a family level. So members of a family might be in a number of different programs and receiving a number of different services. But for the purposes of being able to understand what's having the most impact, sometimes it's really useful to be able to run family reports and have that perspective. You can run an appointments list here in terms of, it'll show you all the things that are on your calendar. And there's some session reports there. Sorry. This is just a little example of our appointment calendar. You can see there's a recurrent appointment there that happens every Monday. You can set that up, or you can add individual appointments. We have a one-way sync from the CSNet calendar, so that any appointment that's put into CSNet will then turn up on your Outlook calendar if it's been allocated to you. It's not two-way because unfortunately Microsoft charges too much money to go the other way, but it does mean that you can use the CSNet calendar as a way of keeping records at a team level, so you can allocate all of the team members to a particular appointment. And then one of the functions of CSNet is you can, once the appointment's finished, you can click on that and it'll take you to a session record, and then you can put in your notes. The other thing that a lot of the web-based systems will now do is to send SMS reminders. So from here, you set it up so that an SMS reminder goes to those people who are on that particular appointment. It just gives you a bit of a sense of how the appointments work. I think I've touched on the fact that CSNet can be used for individual, group work and community activities, and we've really been driven by our customers who say, look, if we want to solve complex social problems, we need to do it at each of those levels. It does mean that by being able to collect the data and keep it all in one place, that you can actually interrogate what's working well. And if the group work is, for instance, peer-to-peer work seems to be getting better results, it means that the organisation can tweak the nature of the programs that it delivers and focus more on one area than another if they have that flexibility around their funding. I think I've also touched on the assessment tools and client feedback surveys. So yes, that's part of CSNet in terms of being able to send that, and what we can do is generate, say you've got an individual client, you can generate a feedback survey for that particular client. You can send it by SMS, a link to your client. They click on that SMS link or an email link, they can fill out the survey, save it, and the records automatically saved in CSNet. The capacity to configure reports for data analysis and link to the quality system, I think, is a really important feature of the web-based systems, because you're getting real-time feedback in terms of what's working and what's not working, rather than kind of doing an evaluation 12 months down the track with the program. You're able to run evaluations and assessments, feedback activities whenever you want to, and then that gives you a much more immediate feedback in terms of the program and the nature of the experience that the client is having in terms of being in the service. For us, our support staff are human services practitioners. We're social workers and not IT people. If you ring the support staff or contact us, you'll get someone who is a sector expert. And I suppose in terms of streamlining data collection and workflows, it's really helpful, we've found, through our customers' feedback, to have somebody who understands your business and you actually then understanding whether or not this is a system issue or a practice issue, and being able to talk to people about any changes that might need to be done to the system in order to better support practice. We will go and talk to our IT people if it's necessary, but to a large extent we can solve those problems and issues, give people feedback and some training over the phone if that's what they need. I just wanted to show you another little CSNet screen. So what this one shows you is, to help with your workflow, is I've clicked here on my clients and activities. In CSNet, the security roles are all predetermined. So as soon as I log in, I'm already, what I see is already determined by my security role. And this is, I think, a really helpful feature as we move to more work where we're collaborating across organisations. That an organisation, numbers of organisations could be working with a particular family, a particular group, or at a community level, and to have the capacity to be able to impose certain security levels so that not everybody sees everything, I think is a benefit of the system, in terms of it gives flexibility around that. It manages issues about privacy. People are really clear about what they've given consent to share across organisations that are collaborating, and when somebody logs in, they will see only those things that they've got a security level to do. You can see on my example here of a screen, I've got 2 individual clients, day and night. I'm doing a life skills group work. I'm also doing Love Bites groups. I've got in here my youth interagency networking group, so that's like a community development activity I'm doing where I'm collaborating with other organisations. And in this particular circumstance, I'm also running a volunteer driving school called Green Light, where I have volunteers who are providing lessons to people who want to try and get their licence and build up their 100 hours, but because of their income level, I would never be able to afford to get those driving lessons. This is just an example, I suppose, of how you can be doing and working on a number of different kinds of activities, regardless of whether it's individuals or at community level. In terms of measuring and client and social outcomes, if we can move to this part of the agenda, it is true that in order for us to do this, we need to be able to collect data over time. And I think one of the benefits of the web-based systems is that over time you might need to tweak the way you do what you do, but you don't necessarily need to lose the data that you've collected in the past. So provided there can be some discussions with your software provider about mapping data that you've collected in a particular way in the past, there's no reason that that data would be lost. So that helps, I think, for the data to be seen to be to contribute over time to be able to pick up those patterns. For us in CSNet, the way we measure outcomes and support customers to measure outcomes is to develop the relationship between the organisation's practice framework or theory of change, to link it to the records of what's being done, and to also link it to the measurement of those, of the work that's being done. So for instance, we would sit with an organisation and go, okay, have you worked out what your theory of change is or your program logic? What is it that in terms of the outcome for the organisation you're trying to achieve? We call the way that we design and support what's being done day to day a plan item. So if I'm working with an individual and they have a case plan, then that would be a plan item. And then the practice records are recorded against that plan item. In terms of measuring outcomes, we connect the plan item to an indicator or an evaluation tool. So that those things I think I was referring to earlier, in terms of collecting client feedback or doing pre and post assessments, they are built into the system and they are done periodically as necessary. In the system, we can use the data to be used. It can be used in individual data items, or they can be clustered. They can be weighted. So it's very flexible in terms of how you not only collect that data once, but you might use it many times according to what's required for the outcome framework. In CSNet, we support any kind of practice framework. So you might be using different practice frameworks. I don't know if anybody uses Outcome Star. There's a number of different Outcome Stars and using their validated assessment tools. We currently have customers who are using that, and it's embedded in CSNet. It just means that they collect the data and it will present the Spiderweb, and I'll show you a little picture of that over time. But increasingly, governments are developing their own outcome frameworks, and so for us and to support customers, it's really important to be able to collect that data once and use it many times so that people aren't having to do a lot of work to get the reporting out for each of those outcome frameworks. Just in terms of the practice framework, it's just worth just taking a couple of minutes to talk about how we structure it in CSNet. One is around plan items. So for those people who are doing casework where you've got a plan, you might need to do an assessment, develop a plan, show what you're delivering against it and review it. And a number of those things might have due dates. If that's the way that you need to work with your particular clients, then CSNet can support that, what we call structured case management cycle. For other organisations, they don't want to have something which is as structured as that, and we have another way that that can work, which is called themes. So for instance, we have organisations that are working to support Indigenous kids to get to school. What they want to do is to just collect data and stories about, you know, what did we do today, what are the good news stories, what are the challenges, what's the follow-up that needs to be done, so that it's those themes can be captured over time without being in the structured case management. Organisations might change over time with that too. So we've certainly seen customers that may well have started with counsellors who wanted to use themes rather than a structured plan, and over time that program's moved to structured case management. That's okay. We can sit and talk to customers about mapping the data across, but it does mean that the systems can be quite flexible depending on the way that the program wants to collect data and wants to structure its practice. This is an example of one of the screens in CSNet where you can see the outcome is at the outcome heading. There's just an example of this outcome is children and young people are physically well and learn how to maintain healthy habits. That's the organisation's choice in terms of that outcome heading. And what we do is to then support underneath that heading these things called plan actions. So it's the organisation saying, okay, we think that if to reach that outcome, if we do something in terms of working with that person around their physical health, their medication, their fitness, their clothing and other basic entitlements, that those things if they were tested and aggregated, would demonstrate something about the achievement of that outcome. And you can see here, in terms of this particular case with Roger Ramjet, they've chosen to work only on physical health, and there's no reason why you need to particularly force a worker to choose all of those. That's entirely up to the organisation. But in terms of this worker, they're working on physical health. There's some case notes that get captured around that. And then in it, you can see there's also what's in progress. At some point in time, that will be reviewed, and it will be, somebody will set that to, yes, that's completed and achieved, or partly completed, partly achieved. However you want to cut that up in terms of your measurement tools. But it does mean that if I'm working with this particular client, I've got a very strong link between what I'm doing with that outcome, and it kind of helps to structure my work. I think I touched on the fact that CSNet supports any use of any kind of measurement strategy. It could be developed in-house, and we certainly have had customers who wanted to do that. It can also be developed from frameworks in the market, and I think I mentioned Outcome Star. We've got a license to put CSNet into the system, but as I said, we support any kind of framework, so it's not proprietary. The Commonwealth Government in Australia has got the SCORE outcome framework. If you know of ARACI, the NEST is an example of another framework that can be supported. The NDIS, we're still waiting for an outcome framework, but we suspect, once that is released, then that could be embedded into the system. New outcome frameworks are being developed all the time, so we suspect that won't slow down. The key, as I said earlier, is about being able to map the data items to the different outcome frameworks and then use that data many times. I just wanted to show you some screens on the assessment. So if I'm running and want to run an assessment, this is an example of how I create that on a screen. I select it. You can see I can choose the activity. There's an assessment date. Here I'm collecting some notes, and I create that from there. If I was opening up this assessment tool, this one is based on Family Star. This is an example of what the survey would look like. So these are the validated survey instruments from Outcome Star. But if you were answering a question about physical care, each of these options is an option as determined by Outcome Star. And so depending on how you respond to that, you'll get a certain level in terms of aggregating the numbers. I've touched on the data items and being able to cluster the data items as well. In terms of the outcomes and impact, it's coming back, I suppose, to what we think is important, which is to be able to create that line of sight between the data being collected from ground up and then running your reports on client and social outcomes. The quality and the timeliness of the data is really important and does give people confidence that you are making a difference. There's just a couple of slides here that I'd like to just show you in terms of aggregated Outcome Star. And this is, so we have a customer that uses this Outcome Star. All on the left-hand side here, these are all the outcome headings. This is all determined by them. And what they do is they do pre and post assessments. So you can see here that there's an average initial score that's created, an average final score that's created for physical health, and then you can see average change. So this table comes directly out of CSNet from an individual, and this table is actually showing you not only for an individual client, but it's also aggregated across all clients across the whole organisation. So you get a very strong picture of what things are changing and where you are on the scale. And this is an example of how that data is then converted into a Spiderweb picture. I think one of the things that we like about this particular Spiderweb picture is that it not only shows where you are along that axis, but it is also the dark bit is showing you amount of change. So some of our customers use this visual to talk to their customers and their clients and sort of have this conversation. We can see that you're doing really well in terms of progress to work, and we've actually made a lot of change since the last time we did this assessment. In terms of your well-being, we can also see there's a lot of change that's occurred here, but what else is it that we need to do to improve there? This is, as I said, this is aggregated data across all clients, across the whole organisation. So if I'm a board member, I'm looking at this. This is also a very powerful tool to see where my strengths are and to see whether or not I might need to tweak programs. You know, do we need to think about running different programs around wellbeing? Do we have enough focus on that? What are we doing? What kind of activities could we perhaps increase? I was just going to touch on payment by outcomes. It is really, I mean, in terms of what's happening in Australia and New Zealand, there's lots of discussion about it. I don't think we've seen anyone completely crack this. And it is important for, I think, for all of us to understand that costs are just one part of the story. It is about to demonstrate what we're doing through well-informed decisions and to be able to link it to the evidence of what's working for better outcomes. There's a couple of references there if you're interested in this area, and a couple of articles at the end. Just, I suppose, as a part of the getting towards the end of the presentation, and really keen to get any questions that you might have, is to think about the technology and the power of it to not only tell us what's happening, but also why. And I think that's benefits that we've seen in terms of that end-to-end system. You might not have a system that is the entire length of the spectrum in terms of from ground up to the measurement of outcomes, but certainly through the use of APIs where you can connect the data from one system to another, it certainly gives you some additional capacity to be able to follow that line of sight all the way along. The patterns that emerge are, you know, it's being able to get real-time data is really helpful in terms of being able to identify the patterns and then making those tweaks. Just in terms of getting the best out of the new technology, for us it is about value alignment. It's about investment in the internal capacity and using the IT tools, but there is absolutely no doubt that improvement comes from the change that occurs in an organisation itself. CSNet was lucky enough to win a grant from Aussie Industry under the Entrepreneurs Program in 2015, and some of that funding will go towards actually measuring the impact that a system like CSNet can have on an organisation. So we've just contracted an independent research institute to actually, with new CSNet customers coming on, they're going to do some pre-work, measure what's happening in that organisation, how do you do what you do currently, and then measure the impact of use of a system like CSNet over time once it's being implemented. I think one of the really interesting things that would be good for us to be able to get feedback on is the extent to which the system is having that impact, but not only that, the change management and the change in processes and the way people are using the system also leads to those changes. Any questions? I'm really keen to get any feedback that people have got, or if you've got any specific questions about your particular sectors. As I said, I've tried to keep it generic so that it covers a number of different areas, but keen to get anybody's questions about specifics. Sean, have you had any questions?
Thanks, Mandy. Yeah, so we haven't had any questions typed through at this point, so maybe while we give people a minute or two to do that, is there anything more that you wanted to cover?
Not really. I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions people have. In terms of case studies, I think one of the interesting things, I think it touches on that previous point about changes occurring in terms of organisational capacity and people feeling motivated to collect data, and obviously when they're motivated to collect data, then the quality of the data goes up too. Is an example of something that happened just yesterday. Actually, we've been working with a small Indigenous organisation in regional New South Wales, and they're just implementing CSNet. They've put all their data, which has been a bit of a certainly an effort for them over the last 6 months, so that they can run a report about the first 6 months that they've of their funding in terms of helping kids get back to get to school and to transition to school. And one of the things that happened is that when the data was collected, we started to run the reports about, you know, what's the data showing in terms of how many kids are being transported. So in this particular program, kids were being picked up in the mornings and taken to school on the bus, and then they're also being provided with services in terms of helping transition to school, to support at school, post-school, getting connections to work experience and those kind of things. But one of the things that the data showed was that across 3 workers who were really the bus drivers, that there'd been 704 instances in which those 3 workers had had contact with that group of children. And while that just sounds like a big number, it's really interesting the reaction of the workers when they saw that number, because they just said immediately, it's just helped us realise how significant we are as people to those kids. And I think, you know, sometimes it's just seeing those numbers which makes a connection with workers, where suddenly they realise the strength of the program and why it is important to collect the data, and then how they can use that data to build on and go, okay, so there's all this discussion about, okay, we're significant people to this young group of young people. What else do you think we can build on in terms of that, and how would we build on that connection? So it's just an example, I think, of how the data can be a powerful motivating force in terms of workers then seeing the reason to collect it.
Thanks, Mandy. Yeah, we have had a question come through from Adura. You might have just covered it actually, but I'll still ask it anyway. And Adura asks, are there any Aboriginal health services in Australia using this?
Yes, so that's an example there, an Aboriginal health service that is doing this other program in terms of school and transition to school, helping kids get to school. In terms of the health end, we're certainly doing covering a range of programs which includes mental health services, counselling. There's also an Indigenous organisation in North Queensland that's using the system for child protection and foster care. So there's quite a broad range of services that are using it for different types of programs.
Great, thanks, Mandy. I haven't had any more questions come through in the meantime, so unless there was some more questions from people wanting to type them through now, was there any other topics that you wanted to cover, Mandy, or are you happy to sort of wrap things up?
Yeah, look, I think with these things, sometimes you can get to the point where you can't listen anymore, and it's kind of like lots of, hopefully we've tweaked people's interest in terms of thinking about how that might be useful in their particular context. If you'd like a demonstration of CSN, we'd be really happy to talk to you about that. And what we tend to do with the demos is to tailor it for your particular service type. If we know that you're doing a particular kind of activity, we'll run the demo so it kind of is specific to your sector. So please feel free to contact us, and we're happy to run a demo and continue the conversation.
Great, thanks, Mandy. Thank you very much for presenting today, and thank you everyone for joining. As mentioned earlier, a link to the recording of the webinar and a downloadable version of the slides will be sent to you all in the coming days, so please keep a lookout. And if you have any questions on today's webinar, please feel free to send them through to events@connectingup.org, or as Mandy was saying, if you'd like a demonstration on CSNet, make sure to contact us at mandy.doon@csnet.net.au. And as always, don't forget to check out our website, newsletters, Facebook, and Twitter for all the latest info and upcoming events. So thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks again. Bye.